Hello friends, today's topic of discussion is film censorship and Lala Rajpat Rai. In the earlier lecture with regard to the film censorship and Lala Rajpat Rai, we talked about the importance of cinema during the colonial period, that how some of the nationalist filmmakers, some of the leaders of the national movement, they wanted to use cinema as an instrument of propaganda, and some of them they were in a way successful with regard to that, and a number of filmmakers as well, they had a lot of sympathy with the national movement. They wanted to contribute their own way to the national movement, and they made films which were dealing with the ideals of the national movement. So during that particular period, we find that some of the nationalist leaders, they also made their own contribution as well, and Lala Rajpat Rai being one of them in that sense, because he talked about film censorship during that particular period, and film censorship itself is a very controversial kind of a subject even today, and there is a lot of debate with regard to whether censorship should be there or should not be, and to what extent censorship should be there. And the debate continues, keeping in mind the different societies which are there and the way censorship machinery functions in that particular society. And in that particular context, we find that we talked about those kinds of issues, that how Lala Rajpat Rai, when Indian Cinematograph Act came in 1918, and thereafter a number of concerns they were also being raised, and the British government decided to institute a committee, the Indian Cinematograph Committee, in 1927, and T. Rangacharya was made the chairman of this particular committee. And when this committee was being appointed, then the idea was to provide some kind of imperial preferences to the British films so that they could be exhibited in India. And in that particular framework, Lala Rajpat Rai's speech in the Central Legislative Assembly on 14th September 1927 was important, that how the British imperial preferences were not to be promoted in India, and he also asked that it is a very objectionable procedure, and he said that when one is talking about this kind of an idea and this kind of a resolution is being passed, then they were trying to in a way protect the British films, and how these British films they were to be exhibited in India, and they were not encouraging in the Indian industry as well. And Lala Rajpat Rai argues that no films except those produced in India should be exhibited in India at all. So in a way he was arguing in the framework of Swadeshi, and leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who was constantly writing in his newspapers Kesari and Mehratta about the Swadeshi issue, and how Tilak was also in a way trying to collaborate with Dada Saheb Phalke, who is referred to as the father of Indian cinema, and he in a way praised his first film Raja Harishchandra. So Tilak was also in a way wanted that more and more Swadeshi films they should be made, and the trio of Lala Rajpat Rai, Lal Bal Pal, as they were known as, they were very well concerned with the issue of Swadeshi as well. And he says that when you are talking about the kind of British Empire and the preferences which they have, then they would only produce films in the British Empire, and how they should be exhibited in India. So he in a way wanted that these kinds of films which are made in Britain, they should be exhibited in India. He questioned them that why such kind of a preference should be given to those films, and he did not see any kind of a basis for this resolution except the anxiety of the government to protect and encourage the British produced films. So he was in a way critical of this kind of an idea which was there, and we also see he questioned that when other films which were coming from Europe or from America, and they wanted to project a degraded view of the European life, then it was not acceptable to the colonial authorities in India, and they felt that the European community was anxious that these kinds of films which were coming to India and which were showing a degraded view of the European life, when Indians will see them, then the kind of idea of superiority which was being promoted and propagated by them with regard to the Indians will not hold any kind of a ground. So, he also questions that when these kind of films which are showing a degraded view, he says that are those films entirely false, and if they are true to the life of the people, why should there be any objection raised to their being exhibited in this country. So, he was raising these kinds of questions, that when such kind of portrayals which were showing a degraded view, they were in a way real, they were true, then what harm would they do when they would be exhibited in India. So, this kind of a conspiracy, which was very deliberate in nature, was being questioned by Lala Rajpat Rai, and this kind of a conspiracy which was deliberate among the film producers in the various countries in Europe and America was to bring into discredit and contempt all Asiatic countries by means of cinematic productions. So, he says that when any kind of a degraded view of the Asiatic life is being shown in these films, it was very deliberate in nature. It was some sort of a conspiracy that they wanted to project the Asiatics in a particular manner, and it was in consonance with the policy of racialism which they followed in Asia and Africa, where they treated these people with contempt, and they in a way talked about the idea of white man's burden, where they felt that the burden of civilizing the natives, whether the Africans or the Asiatics, lied with the colonial empire. And we find that when you talk about the British films in competition with the American films, they do not draw much crowd houses and do not bring in much money. So, he in a way was talking about that how American films were more popular comparatively to the British films, and he in a way objects to the whole of this resolution which was moved, unless the words relating to the British Empire preferences are entirely deleted. So, he says that this kind of a preference which was to be given to the British films or the or to the imperial films, it was to be deleted, and it was not to be incorporated in that particular resolution. And he talks about that how several films which have been seen by him in England and elsewhere, in which most disgraceful and humiliating scenes representing the Asiatic life are shown, the nauseous details of a Raja's life or a Nawab's harem, which are produced simply to prejudice English and other people against the Asiatics in general and Indians in particular. So, he also points out that such kind of life of the elite of the Nawabs and the Rajas in their harem life, which is being shown, and they are being shown as people those who are not of much worth, but at the same time they are having the best luxuries in life, and they are debauched in that sense. So, such kind of portrayals, they were trying to discredit the Asiatics in particular, in general, and Indians in particular. And he also talks about that particular resolution, and he says that in the amendment there is one defect which I wish to point out, namely that the honorable mover has not added the words manufactured in India, and his amendment therefore does not encourage the film industry in India. This was again pointed out by Lala Rajpat Rai, and he says the honorable home member has told us that there was some conference in England which discussed this subject in India was properly represented. So, he raises these kinds of questions, that this is exactly how India is being wrongly forced to accept proposals which are said to be for the good of the empire, but which are very detrimental to India. So, Lala Rajpat Rai in a way puts a very strong critique of that particular resolution. He in a way questions the objectives and the intentions of the government, and he fully realizes that that particular resolution was fully in keeping in mind the racialist policy which was followed by the British, and the kind of prejudice which they held against the Indians and the Asiatics, and he was critical of such kind of British thinking. And he also argued that the way government was functioning, where we find that they had this kind of a habit where they caught hold of one or two gentlemen to represent the non-official Indians in the different conferences. Sometimes it is a Hindu and sometimes a Muslim, but the character is almost always the same. So, he in a way points out the people, those who are chosen as Indians to represent in these conferences, they were being chosen by the British, whether they belong to any kind of a community, but their character remained the same, that they were towing the line which was being followed by the British. And when this committee was being constituted, Lala Rajpat Rai also talked about that how he may inform the Honorable Home Member that the gentleman who was chosen as chairperson, T. Rangacharya, so he was not inspiring any confidence and enthusiasm in the nationalist circles and is not likely to the interest of the people of the country. So, he praises the person. He says that he was a good man, an able man, but he is the favorite of the government. And when the report of this the Cinematograph Committee, ICC, Indian Cinematograph Committee, was published, then Lala Rajpat Rai also talked about that particular report. When this report, after due deliberation, T. Rangacharya and other members, they consolidated or prepared a report, and he says that in the assembly that a resolution was there for the appointment of a cinema committee, and which was moved by the Home Member, and that resolution could not be voted that day, and government made no attempt to do upon the question there as well, and it did something cleverer, for it got the resolution passed by the Council of States and proceeded to appoint a committee. And the kind of amount which was being spent in this particular report at that point of time was rupees 1,93,900, and it was the taxpayers' money as well, as this kind of a question was raised by Lala Rajpat Rai. And he says that it is also a question for the assembly to consider whether it should allow curtailment of its exclusive right to vote finances by this kind of underhand dealing on the part of the government. And the report itself was an interesting document as well, and he says that the kind of committee which was formed and how the committee unanimously turned down the proposal to give preference to the empire produced films. And during the debate on the resolution for the appointment of the Cinematograph Committee in the assembly, Lala Rajpat Rai made certain observations about the proposed chairman which were not considered complimentary in nature. And he says, Lala Rajpat Rai says that once the report is being published, now it is out in the open, and from that point of view, from the point of view of an Indian, it was not a bad report in that sense, and he now is ready to confess that his apprehensions have turned out to be unwarranted as well. And he said that he was feeling glad that he was being mistaken, and he therefore unhesitatingly withdrew what he said about Mr. T. Rangacharya on that occasion. So, we find that how Lala Rajpat Rai was not only forthcoming, but at the same time ready to realize his own mistake when he raised questions about the appointment of T. Rangacharya as the chairperson of the Indian Cinematograph Committee. So, he felt that the issue of imperial preferences was rejected by the Cinematograph Committee, and when one is seeing the report, then one finds that in reference to the exhibition of the British films under the imperial preferences, it is being argued that if there is a misunderstanding of American scenes shown in films and confusion of them with the European civilization, especially British civilization, it is because they regard all of them as one. If too much exhibition of American films in the country is a danger to the national interest in India, then too much exhibition of other Western films is as much a danger. So, the committee realized that the imperial preferences, they should not be given to the British films, and if the portrayal of the American films in India, exhibition of the American films in India is a danger to the Indians, similarly the portrayal of other films which are coming from other European countries is as much a danger as has been pointed out by the committee. And we find that how the Indian film industry requires to be protected, as has been communicated by the ICC, guided and encouraged as it is in its infancy, and it is vital to the national interest that indigenous industry should be encouraged in every way. So, we find that Indian Cinematograph Committee also made a plea that how the industry was to be protected, guided and encouraged, because the industry was in its infancy, and it was also interest to the vital it was also important in the framework of the national interest of the Indians that any indigenous industry should be in a way supported by the colonial rulers. And we find that how the people, those who were associated with the censorship boards, they were also critical the way the censorship machinery was being exercised by the British. And Rameshwari Nehru was a freedom fighter and later a provincial minister in independent India, also raised these kinds of concerns, where she says that she was a member of the Punjab Provincial Censor Board, and we find that censorship, the way it was being exercised, was from the point of view of the government, and any kind of reference to the movement for the liberation of country or to the national leaders was considered as a sedition, and it had to be expunged. So, the members, those who were serving the censor board, they also realized that the way British they were operating at that point of time, their main concern was to protect their own interest, and they realized that such kind of portrayals, the moral and the cultural level of the picture was of no concern to the board when they were viewing these films, and standards they were also not being observed for the maintenance of these kinds of issues. And she had to resign from the board because she could not reconcile in a way to the method of censorship which was being in a way imposed by the British. And we find that how the kind of concerns which were there in the censorship machinery at that point of time, as has been argued earlier as well, that British censorship was reactionary, arbitrary and politically inspired, and it was also against the labor capital conflict, and any kind of democratic ideas which were coming from America, they were also being rejected by the censors, and any kind of revolutionary ideas from Russia, they were also being rejected. And the nationalist ideas they were being projected, depicted, portrayed in some of the films. They were also not being accepted by the colonial censors. For example, Bhakta Vidur, where we find the allegorical portrayal of Gandhi's political activities, or Reth, which was on the Gandhian principles. So, we find that a number of films which were made during this time, they were talking about these kinds of aspects, and these aspects they were not being liked by the censorship authorities or the colonial censors, and they in a way used the censorship authority in a politically inspired manner. And when one talks about these a number of films which were being in a way rejected by the censors, or the kind of questions which were being raised by them with regard to the ideas which were there, one was the exploits of submarine U-35, where it was being suggested that it was likely to injure the British prestige. Another film, Triumph of the Rat, in 1927, it was being suggested that its portrayal of the degeneration of European men and women. Another example was with regard to the Orphans of the Storm, which was made in 1923, and it was being labeled as revolutionary propaganda. And another film in 1925, Battleship Potemkin, it was being suggested that the scenes of brutality and mutiny, they were there. So, we find that the colonial censors, they found a number of objections with regard to the kind of films which were being shown in India, and as I told you, that whether they were concerned with the British prestige, where they did not want that any kind of a portrayal might in a way jeopardize the prestige of the white rulers, and at different times they were also concerned with the degeneration the portrayal of the degeneration of the European men and women, and they were happy with regard to this kind of a degeneration of the Asiatics and Africans, but they were more concerned with their own portrayals. And as we find that Captain of the Guard, Knight Without Armor, and Kid Millions, these were some of the films where we find that any kind of reference to patriotism, independence and Gandhian philosophy was not tolerated. And Aruna Vasudev in Liberty and License in Indian cinema has talked about these kinds of cinema which were being rejected by the colonial censor. She has raised, she has in a way communicated or in a way written about these kinds of films which were in a way excised by the colonial censors. Apart from Lala Rajpat Rai, we also see that there were others, those who were there in the national movement, as I told you earlier, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who in a way supported the Swadeshi cinema of Dada Saheb Phalke, and he referred to Raja Harishchandra as the first Swadeshi feature film because it was entirely made by an Indian, and so in a way he was support, and on the Indian theme as well. We find that such kind of portrayals they were being supported by the leaders as well, and it is being reported as well that Bal Gangadhar Tilak wanted to start a film company with Dada Saheb Phalke, but the idea did not materialize. We also see that other leaders like Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who supported the brandy ki bottle in 1939, and he was also the producer of a film on INA where we find the real footage was used, and the film was titled as Netaji Subhash. So this film was shown to the national leaders in Connaught Place in Delhi, and that kind of a footage was also being used later to make a full-fledged film. And other leaders also realized the importance of cinema. Jawaharlal Nehru, for that matter, realized the importance of cinema, but at the same time he did not provide much support to the Indian film industry once India became independent, as they demanded more and more support from the government. We also find that some leaders like Satyamurthy, who used cinema for the party propaganda purposes during that time, and he was concerned with the with various associations which were there in South India. He was also the president of the South Indian Film Federation in that sense. We find that Mahatma Gandhi, who was shown in films quite frequently, his ideas, his ideology, they were being shown in the films, and Gandhi had developed some kind of an aversion to the films, and Gandhi did not support the film industry, and he considered it to be some kind of a sinful technology. And Gandhi himself did not see film in his life. He did not provide any messages to the souvenirs of the Indian film industry when he was asked to, and Gandhi always had this kind of an idea where he considered that these kinds of films, they are sin, and they are not promoting any kind of good to the people. And it has been argued that only film which he saw in his lifetime was Ramarajya, which was made by Vijay Bhatt. Then we also see that a number of films with regard to Bhagat Singh, they have been made, and how Bhagat Singh's link with the death of Lala Rajpat Rai, who was brutally in a way or in a violent manner, who was attacked when the Salmon Commission protests they were being continuing. But at the same time we do not find that some kind of a film solely on Lala Rajpat Rai has not been made, though a number of films which are dealing with Bhagat Singh, they have been made, whether Shaheed in 1948, Shaheed-e-Azam Bhagat Singh in 1954, Shaheed in 1965 with Manoj Kumar, Shaheed Bhagat Singh 1963 with Shami Kapoor, then Shaheed-e-Azam in 2002, Legend of Bhagat Singh in 2002, Shaheed Bhagat Singh again in 2002. But we find that any worthy film in the framework of the biopic has not been seen with regard to Lala Rajpat Rai, and his contribution not only to the national movement is immense, but at the same time his realization that how film censorship is a very important aspect with regard to the national movement or the presentation of the national culture was also very important, and that is how he challenges the British authority on this count as well, and he realizes that censorship as a device and censorship as a challenge was to be seen in this particular context. So, with this I would like to end the discussion. Thank you very much.